Welcome everybody.
Very typical.
Sorry, to Curate Your Life, Creating Work-Life Balance. My name is Susan Gordon, and I am the Senior Director for Career and Professional Development here with Duke Alumni Engagement and Development. Today we have an amazing fireside chat for you between two great Duke people. Our host in the chat is Ann Woo-Ming Park, MD, class of 1987. Ann is a board certified psychiatrist, a therapist, and a coach who specializes in working with women. She completed her undergraduate degree at Duke, her medical degree at Emory University School of Medicine, and her psychiatry residence at Cornell Medical Center, New York Hospital, Westchester Division, where she was chief resident. Dr. Park's practice provides psychiatric expertise, medication management, cognitive behavioral therapy, and mindfulness approaches to emotional health. And she helps her clients thrive in their emotional lives. Ann is going to be in conversation today with Duke's very own John Blackshear, PhD. John, in case you don't know, is the Dean of Students and Associate Vice President of Undergraduate Education. He's served in a wide variety of roles at Duke since 2001, including academic dean and clinical director of the Academic Resource Center. He's also he's a clinical psychologist by training. He has a doctorate in clinical psychology, a master's in community clinical psychology, and he's actually an adjunct instructor in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience at Duke University. In addition, and this is really why we wanted to get John here, John is the faculty in residence in Trinity Residence Hall, where he lives with his wife, Kimberly, who is also a busy Duke staff member with a big job and 4 of their 6 children. And so if there is anybody who needs to be mindful and thoughtful in order to achieve some sense of work-life balance, it's John Blackshear. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ann, and I hope you all enjoy this conversation.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, John. It's great to be here, everyone. So we're talking about that elusive ideal today, work-life balance, and that phrase has been around for a long time. And I thought I would just do a little research into what Harvard Business Review has to say about it, since they sort of tend to be the vanguard about work-life topics. And so here are some of the things that they cataloged in their extensive catalog on this area. They talked about tips like stepping away from our screens, connecting with others, moving our body, managing clutter as a way of decluttering our minds, and also things like managing burnout by knowing when to ask for help. That approach in particular to achieving work-life balance is of interest to me as a psychiatrist, because I do find that struggles in that arena tend to be, or can frequently be, precipitants for things like anxiety and depression. And as many of you may or may not may know, depression is very, very prevalent. It affects about 7.1% of the US adult population, so that in any given year, 17 million adults are struggling with depression. Anxiety is also very, very common. That is about 19% of us in any given year, and 31% of us in our lifetime meet criteria for anxiety, for an anxiety disorder. And so again, what I'm seeing in my practice is that managing the work-life sphere can go a long way in helping people bolster their resources to managing things like that should they come up, should they arise. Some of the things that I will frequently work on in my practice with my clients are things like learning how to set healthy boundaries in the work environment, learning how to navigate conflict in their organizations. I see that both as a therapist and also as an executive coach. And of course, for some people, there are the biochemical and neurochemical factors that may predispose them to being affected by stress to an extreme degree. So turning to you, John, with your many, many hats, I think I lost track after she said 4 children, but I know there's a lot that you do. And you know, you're a psychologist, you're a dean, you're a parent, you're a spouse. So I know that you've seen both professionally and personally some of the challenges in integrating work and life. So can you speak with us a little bit about what you've seen as the challenges and what you found has worked?
Hey, thank you and welcome everyone. And I've actually been browsing at some of the questions that have come up here and can speak to a lot of these over time. I remember as an undergrad my most favorite professors, they were a married couple, and they seemed to be like the most busy people in the world. And there was something that I adored about it, something that I aspired to when watching how they actually operated in their lives. And then I became pretty close to them, and then was welcomed sort of into the private version of their lives, not just the ones that I get to see as a student at the university. And I really began to appreciate how they were able to segment off parts of their lives that sort of restored them, that gave them this sense of in a place that's meaningful, that wasn't in service to others, because most of their professional work was in service to others. And when folks hear, my resume, or hear what I'm actually sort of doing at any given time, having a private practice where I do a lot of forensic work, or being the dean of students, having the children, having the wife, and it all sounds kind of overwhelming. And I think that the question does come up to me really frequently: how do you do it? And there are things that I absolutely build into my life that allows me to work in a way that where I'm effective and efficient when I am working, but also allows me to really disconnect. I like to tell my direct reports. I just got into this job as dean of students, and this was what was said to me when I took the job. Many of them were asked during their interview, if there's a fire, do you run towards it or do you run away? Expectation was that these folks would always be on, always managing and running to crisis. And I said to them, there was one question in that was missing. Are you smart enough to go and call a firefighter? Hey, give a that can restore it. There's no amount of anything that will sort of build up more time for them, and that it's incredibly important for them to be mindful of how they're spending their time, what they're doing with their time, as I try to be with mine. And I will give you just kind of a sketch of a day for me. My day does start early, with obviously with having a bunch of children under the age of 9 in the home, living in a dorm, getting them set. Right now we're in COVID life, so our children are in school in the dorm, with my wife and I working at the end of the dorm hallway. She's in the foyer, I'm in a study room. This is how we've been living for the past 14 months. And throughout that day, I'm really, really careful to observe myself as I'm doing my many, many tasks. I have my many Zoom meetings. I'm very careful to go stand outside. I'm very careful to go listen to some music. I listen to music every day, a very high quality version of listening to music every day for an hour. It has to happen. If it doesn't happen, my life is not going well and the people around me aren't all that happy. And then the other things that I do is when I'm exiting for the day, I make really, really certain that those several hours I get to spend with my children and wife, that they are as protected as the time that I was given to my students, my colleagues. Be there and be present with them. So I'm not going to think about anything outside of what they need. And then my real guilty pleasure of a given day is cleaning the kitchen. About, for me, spraying down the counters, seeing my stovetop glisten, having all the dishes put away. Just really taking care of my home in that way. Every Friday, here's another one, you will love this. Every Friday, I clean the bathrooms. Oh, is my sound going in and out here? Let me try this. Okay, is that better? All right, is that better?
That's good.
Yeah, so every Friday, bathroom day. I don't know what this is about for me, but it started in my life, and this is what I do. There's something about cleaning my home's bathrooms and making sure that they're pristine and the floors are done. And we're going to go into the weekend and really try to build in that downtime to be sort of present and focused where I am now. Um, Doing that is also modeling for the students that live around us, and it also is modeling for my colleagues, especially the people who report to me. They take a lot of signaling from me with regards to my what I do with my time, what's valuable to my time, and how I mark time for life that is not dedicated to work. They see me in my workspace, incredibly focused,
Hmm.
to be efficient, trying to get things done. And then I think it's important to model um, some of those ways of being outside of the workspace for them to feel comfortable being able to do those things too.
Those are great points, John. And, I'll kind of reflect back what I think I heard you say, which is you use the term you exit for the day. So I love that image of you exiting from one end of your space to the other. But I think it's a great visual image, the idea that we are really, especially now that we're all sort of in place, or many of us at this point are still in place, the idea of creating that clear line, like this is the workspace and then this is the home space, because I think sometimes even when we weren't all working from home, we'd still bring the office or bring the workplace back home with us, or that can be a temptation. So I like that idea of exiting for the day. I also like your versions of self-care. I also love a clean bathroom. I just don't like to be the one to do it, but I totally get where it is therapeutic. I really do. And the music, we're going to talk offline later on about what kind of music, but I hear you.
Yeah.
I think that sounds great. And also being present, which I'm very interested in because, just even taking it again from my particular lens through which I look at things, the idea of, let's say, things like anxiety, people who struggle with anxiety or struggle with things like pain, which can often bring about things like anxiety and depression. Part of the difficulty that many of us face is that because we're not present, our brains are very distracted, and so we are sort of anticipating the next thing that's coming, and that in a way doubles our load, right? Because not only do we have the task that's ahead of us, we're worrying about it ahead of time, or we're thinking about it ahead of time. So now we're thinking about two things instead of just one. And I have a very difficult time being present. I'm working on it, but I really get that feeling with you, John, that you are very sort of in the moment. And I think it's a great way to navigate energy, to conserve your energy and to use it wisely throughout the day.
Yeah, and it also just allows for you sort of get maximal gain out of your moments.
Yeah.
In the sense that when I am on for work, I'm on. And I'm really trying to be there and to get to progress whatever it is that I'm focused on in those moments. And then when I'm on being a parent, I like to be on. I really enjoy the people I live with. Here's another thing, right? My life has not always been that way. Okay, let me be very clear. But I happen to be living with people I truly enjoy, and that I have a very good time with, and I look forward to seeing them. My children ask me all the time, especially my 9-year-old son, what was the best part of my day? And I can say to him without lying, hanging out with y'all. That was it. And I have a very good work life. So I like, but, but, um, but the type of home space that my wife and I are very cognizant of establishing really allows for us both to sort of look forward to being in that space, even though, let me do tell you, um, 4 kids bouncing all over the place in a dorm apartment can be truly hectic, sometimes extremely loud. But
there is something to be said for how we sort of make that space an enjoyable space to come to, and those things play out, I think, quite a bit. Like I said, my life hasn't always been that way. In a previous version of my life, coming home was stressful. Coming home might have had there might have been some reticence for coming home, where I may have actually plugged myself into work in different ways. But and then you mentioned anxiety several times, and being a clinical psychologist who've had to manage his anxiety. And most people don't believe that when I tell them about, I have had to learn how to manage anxiety. I've had to learn how to manage feelings of panic and all of those things. When I was, especially when I was a graduate student, and then got really into, I used to teach meditation and yoga when I was a grad student, and then I began to truly realize that I do enjoy. I like using the Calm app and doing my 10-minute sits and things like that. But the thing that I really had to begin to institute, because those weren't quite the things for me, like sort of sitting, doing the meditation and breathing. I enjoy them. I do them as a part of self-care.
Right.
But the thing that really restores me was putting on the music. So that's my meditation. That's my recenter. And appreciating that one size did not have to fit all, that I could find my own thing to do.
Right. I think that's great. And the idea of identifying, hey, this really works for me. This is sort of my place where I can quiet it down. And that becomes my go-to thing. For me, that was swimming. And that's actually one of the other things I have to thank Duke for. I took this class during freshman year called endurance swimming. I was not an endurance swimmer at all, but it just was a place where physiologically quiet, no one can talk to you underwater. And it's kept me in the zone for however many years, 30 plus years at this point. So it's lovely if we can all identify, maybe there's that place or that thing or that environment that really works for us, and to access it, to allow yourself that. You really do need it. You also mentioned, John, managing your own anxiety, which, it's such a common thing. Definitely, I've been in that same space too, learning how to do that and being aware of things. You shared this very transparently. Sometimes there's reticence to come home. I'm sure you're not the only person who's ever experienced that, right? And I think acknowledging, when we're looking at that idea of work-life balance, acknowledging, hey, you know what? Things are not, I'm noticing that there's not that harmony that ideally should be there. And maybe catching it early, because those things don't tend to go away by themselves. We have an emotional tuning system, really in the same way that we have a pain system in our physical bodies. We have an emotional tuning system in our hearts, I guess you could say, in our minds. And so if that's signaling you that, hey, I'm not really loving to come home, or maybe I'm not really loving to go to work, those are signals that we can pay attention to and maybe be proactive in addressing, as opposed to saying, okay, I'm just going to ignore that and sort of wait. And then what we know, right, John, is that those things can just build over time. Then they go from being a little issue to a bigger issue. So early on tends to be more productive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the earlier you can catch it. One of the things that I had to do was practice humility, being a clinical psychologist, and realizing I needed to deal with anxiety. That was an interesting thing for me. And I know, and I went into to talk to someone about the anxiety, and was really sort of like, wait a minute, I help people deal with this. Why am I having a hard time with it? And why can't I fix myself, right, about it? But it was really, I went and learned so much about why, particularly for me, I was experiencing so much. Someone mentioned elder care in the questions earlier. At the time, I had a mother who was chronically ill before she passed, and also a grandmother who I adore, who's still alive, fortunately, but who began to decline in health, and also other sort of imbalances around my life space, and then spent that time figuring out, number one, how do you share some of that responsibility with? I was fortunate enough to have other relatives. I'm an only child, but I have other relatives who were at the ready to help shoulder that. And then getting into my current relationship, had someone who joined me who sort of looked at the care of these people who we're responsible to, really sort of join me in the sense of finding a great deal of value in that, even though it was incredibly hard work to be involved in that care, especially of my mother as she was, in exiting the term of her life.
Mm.
But um, those were some incredibly trying times. And then I think the thing that helped me more than anything else was um, reaching out to support and getting that professional support to help me, come to terms with what an incredibly difficult period it is to care for a parent who cared for you, and now you're caring for them as they are transitioning uh, into ancestry.
Yeah, I would agree, and I'm sure there's people here who've experienced that as well. I have personally experienced that, and I would have to say, the most challenging season of my life by far, by far. So, and we're aging, and the population is aging. So, it's a likely for many of us here on this call that if you haven't yet experienced it, it may be coming. And so, yeah, being aware that, hey, this is a difficult season, and maybe I do need to reach out for help. I think there's a lot of strength in asking for help. You and I are in the business of doing it, and we know when we reach out for help too, we're not any different than anyone else. We're just as apt to have those struggles and those challenges. And so, yes, I would agree with you. That's been super helpful for me as well, for sure. So just keeping an eye on the time for us, John, because there's so many things to ask you about. I really had to kind of force myself to limit it, but I thought it might be helpful for us and to leave some time for Q&A as well. I thought it might be interesting for people to hear a little bit about your particular experience as Dean of Students. And I'm sure many of us here on this call have heard the statistics about the rising levels of anxiety, depression, and even suicidality among college students. I actually had worked as the college psychiatrist at Barnard for a season. And when I go back to speak to my colleagues there, we see that the sort of the level of acuity and the level of stress that our young people seem to be facing is very, very different than what I face. I'm class of 87, so I know I've got, many of you young people under there, but things have really picked up. And I would really, just a couple of interesting statistics that people might like to hear about. The Penn State does a college mental health report, collegiate mental health report every year. And their most recent report shows that 1 out of every 5 students is suffering from anxiety or depression in colleges across the country. And that those are the top reasons that students come in for counseling. So some of the factors that they cite may include everything from the tug of war between virtual and real life, sort of is real life matching up to what I'm seeing out there in social media? Things like the pressure to succeed leading to an overprescription of medications like Ritalin or Adderall, and that creating its own sort of negative loop. And then perhaps for some of our younger generation, a greater reliance on parental structure, intervention, and support. And so when they go into college and that they're asked to fend for themselves more, that becomes a bit of a crisis. So that's at least what the research shows. But John, you're much, your nose to the ground much more. You're seeing it at the front lines. Can you share with us maybe what some of the challenges you feel our students are facing, and then what can be done, or what's been useful?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I started out at Duke as a staff psychologist at CAPS in 2001, and at that time we began to see this incredible rise.
That's when I was there, same time.
Yeah. Right. And so we start seeing all of these students begin to come in with having, for the first time, quite a few of our students coming in haven't had psychiatric treatment prior to coming to college, and then moved over to the Academic Resource Center. And now, and I thought I knew students so well. I really did. When I became an academic dean, I thought I knew students so well. And then I did something totally unthinkable at 14 years into my time here, moved in on campus. And that is when I really began to appreciate who these incredible human beings are, being that proximate to them. And our students come in through a highly selective process. I mean, we know that. This year alone, we had over nearly 50,000 people apply to come to Duke, right? So we're going to bring in a class that's highly selective. And then when they get here, well, so many of our students also realize that they've had to do a lot of things to make themselves attractive to highly selective universities.
Right.
And I realized that they've spent a great deal of their formative years highly scheduled, highly coached, highly motivated, highly targeted toward their goals. And then they transition to college right at the time that they're transitioning to adulthood, right at the time that they're at a period in life where they're most likely to have their first onset of a mental health condition.
Right.
And all of these things are happening all at the same time. They're novices at living in college. They're novices at being on their own.
Right.
And they, despite, a lot of desire for us to have, so a lot of times I always say, a lot of times our students get delivered here, and the expectation is that we're going to take over those roles of management that parents have done prior to coming, and we just can't. Like, that's not going to happen. And so they come in incredibly targeted and focused. And here we are at a liberal arts institution that then challenges them to sort of survey intellectual development, personal identities, world issues, and it's designed to be sort of disruptive in the sense that it's we're asking students to kind of step into a space where they get freedom of examination and inquiry, because that's what we're about. And then they get a first D in the first term. They've never seen a D before in their lives. And it is extremely difficult to try to convince said student that that D, number one, is not going to be indicative of where your life's headed. And number two, that the D is about that measure in that moment, on that day, at that time, not something characterological about them. They've been so identified with excellence as sort of codified by grades and sort of accolades. It becomes incredibly challenging when students have to begin to redefine what excellence is, who they are, what do they want to do with their lives. Some of them come in, all chasing these so-called noble areas of study, and they find out that that's not what they want to do, and that's not, and they got to convince people who have put a lot into them, invested a lot into them, to allow them to have that sort of liberty. And at the same time, they're also living most proximate to they've never lived, for the most part, near this much diversity ever in their lives. And our students especially now, our students are really, these folks are coming and haven't had thought about diversity. They are so much better with fluidity and ambiguity than we ever were. Yet this becomes the first experience of actually living in these in closely proximate to the diversity that they have thought about or viewed virtually or and otherwise. So there are a lot of challenges that meet our students when they arrive, and then they come in, but they are also incredibly resilient. And then part of our job is to sort of remind them about all of that building that was done prior to them coming here, is a reservoir for them to tap into, a reservoir of strength for them to tap into as they're meeting the challenges of this moment of transitioning to adulthood. And that none of us transitioned to adulthood in a way without, having experienced, challenges that we had to meet on the way to that. And it shows that our students are now way more than when I arrived, more able and willing to seek help. When we offer meditation classes, when we offer self compassion work, when we offer yoga, when we offer any of these things, they're always slam packed full of students. Our students are there. Our counseling and psych services get a lot of hits from our students. Our wellness supports get a lot of service seeking from our students. This 15 years ago, much different approach.
Right.
So our students now are they understand that services are there for their benefit, and what we are constantly trying to do, for them is to get them to also appreciate that the expectation of transitioning from novice college student to masterful college student is a process,
Right.
and also challenge there is a process of maturing from an adolescent to an emerging adult. That's a process, and what they're experiencing is quite normal, and that we got them. Right, that's the other part. Is we got, and so every Sunday, 1 o'clock. Even during COVID, you can come to my place this Sunday and take a look. There will be chairs
I'll be there.
all outside my patio with students coming there, and there will be seniors to first years hanging out. And that gathering is just about having a space where you can come and you don't have to perform. You don't have to perform. We're not going to ask you to be other than who you are in this moment, because our students have been performing so much for so long. And the thing that I really appreciate about being a faculty in residence is we get to give them access to a faculty member in a down, relaxed space.
Yeah.
Where they don't feel like they have to perform for that connection or for me to later write a recommendation.
Yeah, that was so well said, John, and I appreciate that point that you highlighted, that not only are they transitioning from sort of this sort of structured and maybe more performance slash success-based metric that maybe kids who get into Duke have had to operate on for a long time. They've got to transition into sort of a wider definition of what makes success. What does it mean to have a life of value, right? Those are big existential questions that, let's face it, we still grapple with sometimes, don't we? But there's also that developmental piece that they're transitioning from essentially adolescence to young adulthood. As we know that, from our graduate work, that is a time of looking at things like identity and belonging and meaning. So those are also big issues. And that all comes together for the first time away from home, right?
Absolutely.
So I think it's been really heartening to see that. I think as a society, we're kind of recognizing that and saying, hey, look at the resources that we have available for you, because we know that this can be challenging and that the kids are willing to embrace that. What do you think helps them to make that transition more successfully, if that makes any sense? So what are some of the things that you've seen maybe, or that you've observed when kids are able to begin to make that shift, that mindset shift? And I know it's a process. I know it's not like a light goes on, but is there anything that jumps out at you?
So I would say a few things. Convincing them that, and them buying into playing. And what I mean by that is finding something that's not connected with your career aspirations and enjoying it. And that could be coding for one type of student.
Right.
That could be dance for another type of student. That could be involvement with a local high school for another type of student, right? Just finding a way for them to sort of enjoy and play away from the work. The other thing is convincing them and their resource support. And what I mean by that often is family of origin in particular, and their champions, right? To encourage their growth, non-directed, but encourage their growth. We have advisors who are going to be here. We have Career Center who's going to be here. We have major advisors. We have academic deans. We got folks that's going to take care of it on that end, but really providing a lot of space for these students to come into their identities, to come into, to find their intellectual and academic homes without pressure and without sense that if I choose this as an intellectual home, the people who care about me will think that I am somehow being frivolous or have failed. And also getting the students to appreciate that your major does not equal a job. Right? You're not going to, you're not going to study, you know, psychology at Duke, and then somebody's going to hire you to be a psychologist after you graduate. This is not how it works. Your major is that you can major in place in areas that I always tell students, your major should, you know, if you get it right, your major should make the gears in your life start to really line up quite nicely, where the world around you begins to make sense, and you find, you know, areas of inquiry that become sort of a passion for you. And they'll set you up to go wherever you're going to go afterward. But just that liberty. Now, and then the most critical is the emerging identities part. Our students come in and they are growing towards who they are going to be as adults, and or at least, you know, where they aspire to be as adults. And there are times where those emerging identities will differ quite differently from the person that you dropped off. I remember when I went home and made all sorts of proclamations and announcements about how I thought, what I thought about the world. And it was fascinating because my mom had totally had a freak out. She just had a fit about it. But it was my grandmother who was just kind of even keel, like, oh yeah, baby, that's good. Because, you know, she understood, right, the arc of individuation and growth, such that yes, you're going to go out here and you're going to examine ideologies and thoughts and theories that may sound foreign to where she stands, but ultimately she knows the being, right? And sort of, so those are the areas I would say when thinking about how do we make it easier for our students to sort of do these things, of encouraging their intellectual exploration, just giving them room to grow up and to grow into their, you know, identities, and trust, you know, the process. A lot of times our students will feed on the anxiety of the folks who are invested in them. And it will cause them a lot of consternation as they're trying to figure out which way they want to go.
Right. It's a good insight. Thank you, John. There's so much to talk about. There really is. Now, we had agreed ahead of time that what we do is leave some time for Q&A so that we could get people to jump in and ask you or me anything that is particularly of interest to them. So Susan, can I turn this back over to you to kick off our Q&A?
Yes. So so everyone, please share any questions for Anne and John about work-life balance or anything that you're curious about in the chat. There is one that came in. It came in twice. So this person is definitely really wanting to know this, John, is what is that high quality regenerative musical hour? What are you playing besides Prince? We all know you're playing Prince. What else?
Yeah. All right. So, you know, I will be honest. When I went to college, I actually went as a deal with my mom because my sole purpose in life was to go be Prince's drummer. And I studied music when I first got there, and then I changed my major, and then I did all sorts of things. But I was a huge into music all my life, ever since I was a young kid. And so I listened to just about everything. Classical, country, hip hop, R&B, jazz, funk, you name it. And so I took on my background just to show you. So I have 3 types of headphones here that I listen to music through. I have a digital dedicated audio player. I have a DAC, and I have an amp, and all of that to make the sound work for me. And so when I tell you that I am highly invested in this process, it is bonkers, but it's my thing. You know what I mean? And because I listen to music like a musician, I tend to like to have headphones that allow for a lot of clarity, and so it makes makes for fun for whatever I'm listening to, because mostly I'm listening for that moment when I think, what made that person decide to do that? Like, what made them play that chord, or what made them put this little piece right here? And then I drive my wife crazy by making her come and listen to that little segment over and over and over again. And she's not, of course, not having the same experience that I'm having listening to it. But I also admire musicians in the sense that I wanted to be one, but I became a psychologist. So what I did was I really began to study them, and then appreciated that they were sort of scientific artists, the ones that I really love: Stevie Wonder, Prince, Joni Mitchell, you name it, Miles Davis, Kamasi Washington, Gustav Mahler, whoever I'm listening to. And I really studied the folks and what they do. And then I began to apply the principles of scientific creativity to my work. And so they had Ani DeFranco, you name it. Okay.
I feel like that's really great to hear. And both of you, John and Ann, talking about the thing that you find, it's all encompassing, right? You just completely absorb, whether it's swimming or music. At that, you're completely absorbed in that outlet. So we have a lot of questions. One question is advice on coordinating what we do ourselves to find work-life balance with our spouse or partner, especially if this person, their spouse or partner, is in a different situation or a different place with this challenge.
John, me, you?
You go ahead, I'll come next. Yeah.
Well, I'd probably like a little bit more detail on that, but it sounds as if maybe the first place is to, I think sometimes we find ourselves kind of caught up in the stream of life. And then, we turn around and suddenly it's like, oh, I'm working 80 hours a week and you're flying across the country every other day and we don't ever see each other and we don't see the kids, for example. So I think it can be useful to step back and do like a little mini sabbatical, maybe a weekend, and say, okay, well, what are the things that we actually want? How did we, maybe here's where we are. This is a here and now, but maybe there's a different picture that we want to paint for ourselves. And really sometimes even that simple act of laying out some very basic goals, this is actually where we'd like to be. We'd actually really like to be, X number of hours and co-located to one place, or, we'd like to have our summers, for example, if we have that luxury to look like that. Just sometimes a simple process of proactively setting out what you want can be a way to reframe things as opposed to being pulled along by the tide. So I know that's a very generic answer, and there are probably more specific things that you're alluding to. And then, another piece, if I'm hearing that question correctly, is what's happening when my partner and I are really kind of on different pages in terms of how we want to approach it. I would say that a great place to start is to have a conversation, to begin to have a conversation. And those conversations honestly can be hard, right? Sometimes we are not quite sure how to approach even the people we love the most. Sometimes those conversations can feel the most loaded and the most difficult to navigate, but they really can be done. And I'm a big proponent in getting some help with that. I think counseling can be seen in a way as a kind of a mediated conversation, a way for both partners to be heard when it's a little hard to hear the other person. I think we've all had that experience of getting into a conversation with someone and you're listening, but you're really thinking about what you're about to say next. So I only heard really about 50% of what you said. And so sometimes counseling can be great in that it just literally gives each person a chance to lay their book out on the table and everybody else has to listen. And then, the other person gets their time. So that would be, those are two ideas that pop to mind. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, when thinking about that, and again, my partner and I, we do try to connect each day. Now it's not always, it's not always in the same way. I mean, especially she used to travel a lot more for her work, but even when she did, we would make sure that we spent some time during that day, just connected, and not I'm not talking about connected. I mean, just enjoy talking to each other, not what are the kids doing? What did you eat? You know, because she know that when she goes out of town, the kids are having Chick-fil-A every night, you know. So no, she's not, it wasn't that kind of just kind of rote moving through the processes, but really really kind of going through our routine of just checking in and connecting on each other. That becomes the big part. And there are times when, you know, my work demands or hers will ask, you know, of us to be, you know, away from home during that period that we usually do spend connecting. But, you know, we have to really make sure that when I notice that creep, I also make sure I set an end time for that for me. I won't let it become the habit of my job. And she may do the same, but I am, you know, I really, yesterday, Tuesday, I'm sorry, I had a staff meeting with the Dean of Student Staff. And I did not intend for people to be in there crying and all kind of stuff, but we had a staff member who was on the screen with his newborn baby. And showing us the baby, and our baby's adorable. And but it was in that moment that I just wanted to remind them that, you know, my working philosophy is when you take your last breath, right? I'm not sure you're going to be thinking about the email you need to send. Like, you can be thinking about that bundle you're holding in your arm. You can be thinking about those places, hopefully, that are just really meaningful to you. So I really do encourage folks to be extremely guarded and selfish about taking time to be present in the spaces away from work with their community. I don't, you know, doesn't big families look a whole lot, you know, there's chosen family, there's friend family, there's away from work in spaces that are meaningful to them, because you know, ultimately that's where the legacy exists for them. And so I am strong about that for my folks who work for me. Like, they have to do it because you know how people are when they're not doing it. They become miserable at work. Their productivity gets shoddy, or, you know, all kind of interpersonal dynamics become problematic in the workspace. And so, so for me, it is really, it is something that I just hammer home, that I'm going to be selfish when it comes to taking, like, I only get 2 or 3 hours with these, 3 or 4 hours with these folks a day. I'm sorry. That's all I get. So I'm going to be selfish with that time.
Right.
I got to be.
Thanks, John. And another question that came in, which is similar, I think, in terms of kind of fairness, I guess, in like, you want to find your own life balance, and then is it fair? Are the people that you're with, someone posed a question about elder care, caring for parents, and if one sibling feels like they're carrying more of the burden, and in particular, this is a woman, and then she maybe felt like her male siblings or brothers are not caring. Is there a gender element? So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, that can cause a lot of resentment. Let me tell you. My aunt currently, we're all caring for my grandmother. But, you know, my grandmother sort of resides with her, and, you know, like, her sister just doesn't jump in, right? It's either me or my aunt, right? And my aunt feels guilty sending my grandmother to be with us because she's like, oh, you got all these kids, you got whatever. But you know, that is very difficult, and, you know, requires a negotiation, because the families are all different, right? And so, what, you know, is there a way to talk to these siblings to actually have an honest conversation about sharing this burden, or are we standing, you know, and expecting them to sort of look and go, hey, I should be doing more here, right? Because sometimes they'll think, like, you got it, you're not complaining, carry on, right? So, so I don't know. I mean, that would be something that would be wise to visit, whether there's actually a rejection in sharing that responsibility, or is just the assumption that because you usually do it, you dove into it, you are doing it, that you're good and you don't need to share that responsibility.
Great point. So sort of asking for what you need. I would say that I do feel that the sort of the burden of caretaking tends to fall on women. I think that just somehow we maybe culturally kind of step into that. But I love your point, John, which is communication, right? Hey, this is not really working out for me. I'm feeling burnt out or I need help. Another thing, if, elder care frequently is around things like progressive illnesses, right? Like progressive medical disease or progressive dementia. So you may have kind of an earlier warning that, mom or dad is not doing that well, or auntie or uncle is starting to, fail a little bit or fall. And that might be a great time to step in with those conversations, because generally these things progress. So they're not going to get easier. They're going to get harder. And having, that honest conversation, getting everyone together and saying, this is what we're going to have on our hands. Who can do what? Who can step up? And sometimes that elder has to be in one physical location, but perhaps the siblings can help out financially, right? Or there are other ways that people can step in if they can't be hands-on. So I like that idea of calling it early and having that discussion.
And I did, but if I might, I saw a question here about how do you sort of be selfish with your time or alone time if you have a spouse that always wants to be with you all the time? That's a fascinating one. I myself do require, again, I put my headphones on, I'm out, or sometimes I might just go lay down in the room and be quiet for a little bit. But my partner doesn't read that as a rejection or So I think that trying to what does it mean? And I had to get to the place of not feeling guilty about needing that time. I am a person who I'm slightly more introverted than she is, so I am a person that needs a little more checkout time, whether that's reading a book, whether that's I need something, and it becomes, I'm sorry that they're mowing outside my window here, but that becomes something that I had to not feel guilty about just taking again, because I want to be good when I am connected, and not being able to have that time makes me, it diminishes my capacity in some ways.
So maybe the framing there is something like, this allows me to be more present and sort of a less cranky person to be with. So think of it as a win-win.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then I saw one more that I just wanted to chime in about was caring for, how do you get, sort of that time when you're a single parent, and managing and caring for your kids, and then needing that sort of, how do you get to build in those restorative moments for yourself, as an older parent. So I would say, having been a shared custody following a divorce before, and looking at, thinking about those times, I didn't appreciate really, because I was more flexible with time when it came to like the kids' daily lives. I did not appreciate how important it was for like children to have a bedtime. And because having my bedtime really did allow for me to then anticipate a time for self after that bedtime, and that the bedtime, couldn't be, incredibly fluid, because then it would eat into that. But sleep is important for them. But for me, I remember specifically during that period of time, having to be on, being very focused. I grew up with a single parent, and watching what she had to sort of do, but then also realizing that I did not have to be my children's entertainment, and that became an interesting one for me, because I do love engaging them and hanging out. But then after a while, they're sort of just like, will you go outside with me? I'm like, what do you mean will I go outside? Like, go outside, play, go skate with each other, do whatever you do. But it became this thing where it was almost like I had to be actively in it for them to consider it play and fun. And I was just like, okay, now I'm gonna have to back myself out of this. Like, you all have got to be able to go into your room spaces and go into your other spaces and be kids in that space, and I be away from that. So it's been super interesting to ping back into my head, like, and of course, you always want to go back. When I was a kid, we would leave the house early in the morning, wouldn't come back home to the sunlight, right? So the sun,
I was about to say it.
right? But yeah, my kids would never even dream of roaming as far away from home as we used to roam. But that piece of me exiting their play and allowing them to be engaged without my being involved in that also gives space and time.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think for whatever reason, John, in our current parenting environment, we have a hard time doing that. We sort of feel guilty. And as we're saying, our parents wouldn't have given it two thoughts, would have been like, what child? So that may not only be something that's great for single parent, but married partners, and good for the parents and maybe good for the kids, to harken back to that earlier topic of kids who come in with a lot of support and coaching and, every little piece of their life sort of being managed for them, that we as parents can actually do them a favor by saying, I'm not managing that for you. You need to, I'm over here, you're over there. So it can be good for everybody. Great point.
Yeah. And yeah.
Thank
Our
you.
older kids.
Sorry, I gotta. It is.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I know. This is like we all can listen to you both forever, honestly. But I don't want to respect everyone's lunchtime. Those who are on back. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, John, for joining us. Thank you, all of you great Duke alumni for joining us. I'm putting a link in the chat to all of our career resources. My email. If you want to reach out to me, any questions or requests for future programming, and then I'll quickly share our next event, which is next month. It's May 13th, and it is mostly a great fit for our more recent grads. So if you are one or you know one, this is like you got that job, and then 2 years later, you're thinking, I don't like my job, or how do I get the next job, or how do I get the better job, or how do I do something different? So this is a great panel, May 13th, who are there to talk about that. And we would love to have you. Please spread the word. And thank you so much for joining us today.